Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to touch on a topic that I only rarely discuss, and that's the video gaming industry. And the reason why I do that is because a number of years ago, a lot of my subscribers informed me that I was missing out on a big part of the puzzle if I was going to talk about the ideological capture of our culture through entertainment and not pay any attention to the video gaming industry. Plus, I suppose a little bit of respect for Carl, Sargon of Akkad, who I think really cut his teeth in Gamergate. Our discussions back and forth and his promoting of my channel probably accounts for about 1/4 of my total subscriber base, because my origins here on YouTube are in Comicsgate and we saw ourselves allied on certain subjects, to say the least. But my point today in covering the gaming industry is to take some of those hard lessons learned within the comic industry and apply them to the gaming industry today, because the gaming industry has not fallen completely to the ideological scourge of quote unquote progressivism, but it's getting close. So I'm going to go over a few articles that are in the news right now concerning the gaming industry just as a backdrop, and then use those to jump off of into what I think really is the failing defense of the gaming industry to keep itself from being ideologically overwhelmed. But before I do that, just want to remind everyone that there are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. They are stories that are inspired by the idea of a true traditional hero. They are merit-based in their construction. There are 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 return to form for low fantasy, Crom the Destroyer. We are also working on 3 different projects right now. 1, a continuation of our superhero universe, another in the more film noir genre, and 1 manga-style book. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those projects in the background, completed and in progress. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. And I will be playing at the end of this video a short trailer for one of my graphic novels to give you more idea of what my graphic novels are like if you're interested. Okay, so back to the topic, and let's set up this backdrop from which I want to jump off of, going over a couple of news articles. Now, I'm not going to cover these in depth, but at the very least, I'll give you in the background a screen capture of where they're from, so that if you want to go and read the entire article yourself, you can go and do so. I find that one of the easiest places to access a lot of these ideas at once is the site That Park Place. So I'm going to be covering a number of articles that they have. So number 1 is a story that I touched on about a month ago, which is the game called Dustborn. It's a game that is woke as all get out and was designed as such and was given millions of dollars in government grants in order for it to be developed. And the gaming industry is freaking out about the fact that, well, the woke part of the gaming industry is freaking out about the fact that nobody is buying or playing this game. At the very least, though, I'll have to say that it is very much the attempt of what we're always saying that these people should do. We're telling them, stop corrupting IPs that actually have some merit, that exist to begin with, and make your own game, make your own comic, make your own story. They have done that now, and it has failed miserably. So honestly, I think this will be the turning point of certainly game developers moving back towards corrupting IPs. There's another story making the rounds about a senior editor at Kotaku, where she is threatening to sue another YouTuber, because she regularly does this apparently, because he is criticizing her about pushing this quote-unquote progressive agenda within video games. And although that is a story unto itself, I find it more telling that I went to this woman's Twitter page, and first off, if you want to go to these quote-unquote progressive people's Twitter page, you better have yourself a hearty constitution and a stable stomach. But looking into some of the stories that she would normally cover, the first one that I ran across, again, article from Kotaku, is a story by her saying, TwitchCon is very queer. How the streaming convention strives for inclusivity. Then she goes on to talk about how Twitch, which most gamers know as a platform for gaming or for gaming streams, has started to host more and more since 2020, what you would call drag shows online, because that's where these people make their money apparently, and that's why they're having this inclusion benefit within TwitchCon, because it's all about drag shows. And while you may see that as something separate than the gaming industry, it's really telling what part of the article itself says, where they have quotes from Twitch's chief marketing officer, I think her name is Rachel Delphine. She says that our platform has rules, and that their team is, quote, very intentional about what is and isn't allowed on the platform. further going on to say, "We never claimed to be a place for free speech," and later saying, "The way that we market ourselves is very intentional to make sure that we are telling the story about Twitch, that we're telling a really diverse story that properly captures the people who are there, the kind of content that they create, and the kind of vibes that exist on the service." They also, in this article at one point, go on to demonize any other platform within which you would go and actually find free speech and could stream as a gamer as being a far right bastion. So, of course, the point is that you can only stream on Twitch if you want any real money, any real engagement. And if you want to stream on Twitch, A, they're not a free speech platform, and B, you have to follow their quote unquote progressive rules. And that brings me to the last story that I want to cover, which is basically under the same heading as what I just said, where a Sweet Baby Incorporated employee, now, if you don't know who Sweet Baby Incorporated is, although I have done, I think, 2 videos on them, they're basically sensitivity readers for gaming. They'll take people's games and then see what they're doing with them and say, no, no, this is all wrong. You have to insert progressive politics here, here, and here. So a Sweet Baby Incorporated employee admits goal is burning the gaming industry to the ground. And having watched the video from this employee themselves, yes, that's what they're doing. This is not a misquote. This is one of the bullet points they have next to their name. All right, so with that backdrop, let's talk about the close, some might even say imminent, ideological capture of the gaming industry and what people can do if they wish to prevent it. Now, gotta say, right off, fully admit, I'm not a gamer. Used to be long time ago. I think the last game I played all the way through was probably Icewind Dale or Baldur's Gate 2. So that's how old of games I used to play. And certainly I played first generation games of a lot of the things people know about, like Doom and Heretic, SimEarth, Wing Commander. The Ultima games were the thing that I thrived on the most, just until the last 2, which were complete garbage, and the last one, which was partly complete garbage because of an ideological insert into the entire game of things that did not belong there. And this was back, I don't know, mid 1990s, where they started to talk about in this fantasy world human rights. Now, you want to talk about human rights? You go right ahead. But the platform of a video game in a fantasy world, yeah, that's not the place for it. Certainly not when they assume things to be true, which I don't hold to be true at all. It really takes you out of the gaming experience. But my point being, yeah, used to play games a long time ago. At the very least, though, I know what a good gaming mechanism looks like. I've seen ideological inserts into games, which I then abandoned, and maybe it is necessary to have a view from an outsider, someone who might be a little more disimpassioned, a little more objective about the entire thing. And at the same time, someone who has watched the entire thing unfold within a system that has already been captured, which is the comic book industry, which is what I usually cover. And the same thing happened with the games and the comics for me at the same time. It was probably 1996. I could give you the exact month if I could look at comic covers, but I just stopped buying new comics because I saw an ideological insert at that time. I literally said to myself at that time, why am I paying this much money for people to preach at me things that I don't agree with? And I gave up on new comics at that time, simply going back to buying old comics collections, things like that. It wasn't until slightly before I started this channel about 6 years ago that I actually really looked back in on the comic industry to see how this ideological capture actually proceeded and took complete control. And just in case anybody's wondering why the entire thing smacked me in the face so hard when I saw it around 2015, 2016, was because I had spent, at least 10, maybe 12 years living basically as a hermit since about 2003, never seeing a piece of news, a piece of television, any real entertainment at all for that entire time. So to see it from one side, wherein I was looking at it going, yeah, I don't want to be a part of this anymore, I'm going to abandon it, to seeing the entire system taken over and just being used as a flesh puppet by the people who were controlling it, yeah, that was a bit of a smack in the face. But anyway, enough of my rambling. Let's go back to the problem. And the problem is that the defenses for the gaming industry are starting to break down. Now, someone might claim that, well, they won't break down fully because we get so much of our gaming from other parts of the world, Japan, Korea, etc., where they have what appears to be, at the very least, a more conservative culture that is not going to be taken over by this woke, quote unquote, progressive ideology. But that's not really the case. The point is, that I've pointed out many times on my channel is that this quote unquote progressive ideological movement is one that adapts to each successive culture that it tries to invade. So, yes, there is plenty of quote unquote progressiveness within Japan, within Korea, within other countries that work on these kinds of games. They just don't look the same as they look here in North America. Because again, they're adapting to the culture itself in order to more easily facilitate their ideological capture of the culture. Now, do I think that Japan or Korea are as far gone as North America or Europe? No, but they're not as steady a bulwark as most people within the gaming industry and within the anime and manga industry think that it actually is. So, long story short, there is don't depend on your allies to come and save you. You may get a rude awakening in the end. But let's take another look at those stories that I just covered, focusing first on the last one and going backwards. So, the point of this person who works for Sweet Baby Inc. is that they fully believe that their intention is to, quotes from their own site, burn down the gaming industry. Now, this can be taken in two different ways, both of them being true. Number one being what we have already seen within places like the comic book industry is that A, they want to infiltrate the industry enough so that they not only can take it over, but if their takeover of the industry will not hold, then they will simply burn it to the ground. They will not allow the industry to exist if they cannot control it. And second, which is, of course, tightly linked to number one, is that this ideological takeover is a revolutionary spirit. It's to say that what exists now is no good. We must take over the entire thing and revolutionize the entire thing so that it is directed towards something else entirely. And of course, as we can see from that Kotaku article and the people from Twitch that are talking about their platform, that ideological capture is, of course, directed towards your quote unquote progressive ideology. It's not a free speech platform. You can only have political ideas from one side of the aisle. That's it. And of course, when you're doing so and then promoting drag shows at the same time, I think you know what side of the political aisle that they're on. And of course, this is supported by the fact that the person who wrote that Kotaku article continually tries to sue people for actually exercising their free speech, which again points back to the fact that they will allow no opposition to their ideas. If they're allowed to revolutionize things as they wish, it is not to make things freer, it is to make things one way and one way only. And again, as I noted with that story about Dustborn, that's most probably an ideological kick in the pants to people who want to see quote unquote progressive ideology take over games, that they cannot create something and have it actually work for them. They must take over existing IPs. That's the only way it's going to work. But for a second, I would like to look at it more in terms of what the other side themselves sees as what they're trying to do. Now, again, drawing off of the stories that I've covered on my channel, I did a series of videos, I think it was probably 3-4 years ago, where I went to actual feminist literature. I went to feminist journals and read a number of them based upon this idea of ideological capture. And what did they do? How did they discuss the entire thing? Well, they discussed it in the following form. They said, first of all, feminism is the origin of all of what you see around you today. They claim over and over again that it doesn't matter what it is. If it's the rainbow flag and all of its different stripes flying overhead or within your game, it doesn't matter if it's a black square movement that say only one skin color actually matters. It doesn't matter. They're all working off of the feminist playbook that was instituted decades before. That's their claim number one. Their claim number two is that if they wish to do it correctly, they have to follow the pattern of feminism, which is, and this is the actual way that they discuss it over and over again, as if it were a virus. They say that feminism needs to act as a virus to infect a host that is not open to its ideas, slowly build up within that system until they take over the entire thing. So again, these are words from feminist journals themselves. This is their playbook. And here's the sad point when it comes to creative endeavors. Again, I always go back to Aristotle and his statements about how the easiest corruptible form of argumentation is storytelling. The easiest way to be a sophist is through storytelling. That's why we see this ideological capture of our culture coming through the Trojan horse of entertainment. But the point is that within a creative system such as entertainment, doesn't matter what form it is, video games, comic books, movies, television, novels, we see the same pattern over and over again because there is a liberal streak in the entire thing. As I talked about earlier, talking about being on one side of the aisle or the other, it's not a false dichotomy. It is actually the way things play out. I personally, as a conservative-minded person, would claim that the origin of all these quote-unquote progressive ideas is liberalism itself, or the corruption of liberalism at its very essence. Now, if you want to make an argument for the opposite, well, go ahead and do so. I'll listen to that kind of argumentation. But even though I recognize that there are heavy liberal strains within creativity and creative endeavors, and I do have a heavy strain of that within my own subscriber base, the point of infection from these ideological viruses is through liberalism. Even if you don't claim that liberalism itself is part of the disease, it's the infection point. And that's so hard to hear for many people that I'm sure a lot of people, if they've gotten to this point in the video, are turning it off now. But it is specifically the case. I'll give you one example of this, again, from the comic industry that I usually go back to. If you look at Marvel Comics from the 80s and early 90s, it was fairly conservative. You had Jim Shooter in control, bringing Marvel into what it actually looks like today, and the successive editors-in-chief after him having a similar kind of mindset. And then, within the 90s, as I just explained with my own experience, you saw the wheels fall off the entire thing. Why? Well, there was an interview with Bobby Chase, who is one of the editors-in-chiefs from the mid-90s of Marvel Comics. And she talks about how she got into Marvel Comics, how in the late 80s she was looking for an editorial job, and according to her, she was told at that time, okay, we're going to give you this job, but you take your northeastern liberal politics and you check them at the door because most of our Midwestern conservative readers don't want to hear anything about that. And in her own words, she said, she nodded, said yes, yes, and decided to do the exact opposite because, as she goes on to tell, her parents had taught her this exact thing, to infiltrate from within and then change and take over. And by the time you get to the mid-1990s, where she is one of the editors-in-chiefs of Marvel, I could certainly see the writing on the wall. And we diverge into two separate points at this junction. Number one, it's the fact that, yes, you had the people hiring who were not gatekeeping enough to keep these other people out because they had a liberal mindset. They said, okay, we'll allow you to come into our space and actually work within our space because we know that you don't agree with what most of our clientele, most of our readers actually think, but we assume that since we can put our political beliefs aside, that you can put your political beliefs aside and just work on something professionally. When these quote-unquote progressive people can't do that. They are, like the guy from Sweet Baby Incorporated, revolutionaries. How can you tell a difference? What's the litmus test for this entire thing? Well, I'll go back to what it makes me think of is an interview with Jordan Peterson. I don't particularly like to quote him too much. I don't agree with everything that he says, certainly. But he was talking about how when he was on the other side of the aisle and was trying to work from that side of the aisle with the people over there on the left-hand side of the aisle to bring culture back to some kind of sanity, he said he met over and over again with a number of politicians to try to come to an agreement of what they could do to make society, culture, politics more what he had remembered it to be, more what he thought it should be. And he said, to a man, all of those politicians and that discussion with them would fall apart when he would ask one question. And what is that question? The question would be, how far is too far for the left? And he said, to a man, none of them would answer that question. None of them. So there's your litmus test right there. If someone cannot answer that question, if someone cannot see a limit to how far they wish to drive something, then they're a revolutionary. Pure and simple. And you cannot take the liberal stance of, well, I can hire whoever because they can put their politics aside and actually work on the project in a disimpassioned way without allowing their political ideology to interfere, like the guy who hired Bobby Chase thought he was doing. You can't do that. You can't take that liberal stance anymore. It has been proven that these people are, again, revolutionaries. There is no end point. They will continue to push the entire thing until they get their way, which is ideological capture. And secondly, this whole thing points to a very specific kind of gatekeeping, if you ask me. Because if you have a virus trying to infect you, you have two paths open to you. Number one, you can try and destroy that virus and get rid of it, whether it be its total existence itself or the fact that you have any connection with it, you're getting rid of it. Or two, if you're going to be constantly subjected to it, you need to have yourself a very, very robust immune system, pure and simple. So if people say, well, you can't get rid of liberal individuals if you want to actually do anything creative, I will argue that point. But let's say that that's clearly the case and that's the route you're going to go, then you need to have a very robust immune system. And what is that very robust immune system? Well, it is editing, at the very least, for all the things I deal with. Comic books, graphic novels, books and novels themselves. It comes down to editing. And again, let's go back to that Bobby Chase interview that I just talked about. What did she initially come in as? An editor. What did she become at the end and then use to corrupt the entire comic system from within? An editor-in-chief. It seems bizarre to have to explain the entire thing, but we've gotten to a point where you have to. But editing should be the ability to apply in a disimpassioned way very specific rules and limitations to your creative endeavor. Having worked with editors before, certainly for my novel manuscript, yeah, they are vicious. They take something which is very personal to you and they rip it to shreds, saying, this is wrong here, here, and here. Redo this, that, and the other thing. This doesn't work at all. Get rid of it. That's the way an editor should work, and that's the way an editor does their job correctly. For again, things like novels, there's a difference between copy editing and story editing, but both need to be done. Copy editing basically telling you where your grammar is atrocious. Again, applying that to sequential art, telling the artist where they're putting tangent lines in that don't work, things like that, which will draw the eye of the person away from what is going on. But there's also story editing. And story editing is a must. And story editing is to say, again, as I've experienced, an editor needs to have a very strict definition of how human beings actually work and apply that to the story. And I've seen it over and over again, saying, human beings don't work this way. That's wrong. Rewrite the scene. And certainly having ideas flow from that like continuity, saying, you can't have this character say X, Y, and Z because that would contradict what they said earlier on in the book. The greatest example I always go back to is, once again, Jim Shooter working at Marvel Comics when the Dark Phoenix saga was being proposed to him. And he had Chris Claremont come in and say, we're going to have the entire thing, after Jean Grey destroys an entire planet's worth of people, to have her just lose all of that power and go back to being a normal schoolgirl. And Jim Shooter said, absolutely not. Human beings do not work that way. That is a bad story. And Chris Claremont argued with him. So is the story from Jim Shooter, saying, you have some kind of moral imperative you're trying to impose upon me here. And Jim Shooter looked back at him and said, no, it's a bad story. Human beings do not work that way. Once again, just giving you an example of, yes, an editor really needs to have a firm grasp of the reality of human existence in order to understand what in a story does not work. And not only that, but as Jim Shooter did, employ the entire thing in a disimpassioned way and say, this, that, the other thing needs to go. So, the robust immune system of any storytelling industry, and what we're talking about here is various industries that tell stories in various ways, is editorial. If you don't want to have gatekeepers on your entire industry, you need to have the most ruthless gatekeepers on who you're going to hire as editorial staff. And those people need to counter the entire liberal mindset of the creatives with a gigantic conservative red mark of their pen going across the script saying, no. And just as within the comic industry, that entire editorial system has fallen under ideological capture. Again, I've done several videos on that entire thing. Words from the employees that work at Marvel Comics themselves saying how they don't editorialize in that way anymore. Or not only from my own experience, but talking to science fiction fantasy writers like John C. Wright. I have an interview with him on my channel. Him going back to the sad puppy movement, which was, I think, early 2000s, talking about how the ideological capture took over the science fiction and fantasy novel industry. Within these storytelling spheres, it's too late. But within the gaming sphere, there is some hope still there, except for the fact that we look at Sweet Baby Incorporated, which is what? Well, they're sensitivity readers. And what do sensitivity readers do? They take everything, even after editorial has gotten a hold of it, and saying, no, we're going to edit it further so that the ideology of this quote-unquote progressive movement is what is imposed, once again, directly on the entire thing. And Sweet Baby is not, by any means, the only ones doing this within the gaming industry. So the point being, then since we see that, and since we know that people within Sweet Baby Incorporated have this revolutionary mindset, we can see the immune system of the gaming industry starting to fail. And again, you can't rely on your allies to come charging over the hill from Japan or Korea or other less contaminated societies to save you. And it really all comes down to a question which I can't answer. And that question is for gamers, and I suppose game developers as well. You have already, it is obvious, have already contracted this virus, which has infected and killed many of your compatriots. On top of that, your immune system of editorial has begun to fail. Do you have what it takes to look at this in a disimpassioned way, to understand where that infection came into your entire system, and in essence, purge yourself of all the vicious habits that allowed you to get infected in the first place? So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels that focus on the traditional idea of a hero, the traditional way of making good stories and good art. You're looking at some of that spectacular art in the background. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. Or if you've already done so and wish to promote my books further so that you can continue to have great stories from us, then share this video, because my videos are the main driving source of how I tell people about my books. And don't forget, just after I finish speaking in a few seconds, I will be playing a short trailer for one of my graphic novels. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.